How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and we are back with another Mercury Retrograde. This time, we're having the Mercury Retrograde in Scorpio, and it's going to be happening from October 31st, yes, on Halloween, all the way until November 20th. So sit down and buckle up as we get to talk all about the Mercury Retrograde happening in Scorpio. And, of course, I just want to thank you guys for watching this video, liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. And if this is your first time on my channel, I welcome you here. My name is Cameron White. I'm a professional astrologer, and I do weekly horoscopes, monthly horoscopes, and a lot more, but I always make sure I do a Mercury Retrograde video for every single Mercury Retrograde that happens throughout the year. So let's go ahead and start talking about this one. In this video, I'm going to be covering all of the logistical stuff about this Mercury Retrograde, about what days it's going to be doing stuff on, when it's going to retrograde, station direct, also what aspects it's going to be making to other planets as well, because that always, of course, changes the flavor a little bit of each Mercury Retrograde. And then more towards the end of this video, I'm going to be talking more about what this Mercury Retrograde means and what's going to be coming up for it, what it's really going to look like and feel like, and really how to work with it, not necessarily to be against it, because this is a Mercury Retrograde. You know, it's going to cause problems. It's going to cause, you to review and reflect on things like most Mercury Retrogrades do. So Mercury retrogrades usually about 3 times every single year, and it's a very, very common theme. It's Mercury. Mercury is about minuscule things, so it's not always the end of the world like everyone says that it is. Now, Mercury retrogrades are about 3 things: revisiting, reviewing, and reflecting. Mercury retrogrades are all about bringing something up to you that you've got to come right back over to handle, and it's kind of annoying, it's kind of frustrating, but that's how life works. But what's awesome about Mercury retrogrades is that it can give us insight into what exactly it is, that part of our lives where we have to kind of go over again and retrace our steps and, fight back over to kind of get over that hump. So before we talk about what Mercury is actually doing while it's retrograde, let's talk about Mercury and the sign Scorpio so we can understand the themes of this retrograde better. Mercury is the planet of communication, of our ideas, how we think, how we speak, how we vocalize our thoughts, how we, write things down. This is, Mercury is all about communication. Now, with Mercury being the messenger, being the communicator, this is why you often hear so many times that Mercury retrograde gives you problems with communications, with, technology, because Mercury does have an association with that. However, let's talk about the sign Scorpio. Scorpio is a water sign, so this does have to do with more of an emotional state, not necessarily emotions of bad or good, but feeling them overall. Scorpio is a fixed sign, so it likes to make things stay the same way. It likes the consistency. It likes to be in charge. However, one thing that is really talked about with the sign of Scorpio is the fact that it rules hidden things. It's all about the dark. It's all about secrets. It's all about mystery. It's all about, not being vulnerable and being protective. Scorpio is ruled by the planet Mars, so there's a lot of active and energized, feelings when it comes to Scorpio. Scorpio likes to be reclusive. It likes to be in the dark. It likes to hide away. Scorpio is all about the hidden things that we don't always see. And so when you have Mercury retrograding in the sign, this is where you might have miscommunications or communication errors with things that you might not have seen before, or something that kind of gets unearthed, something that comes out from the shadows that you may not have expected. And so with that being said, we'll of course dive more into that, but let's start talking about the logistics here. So every Mercury retrograde really begins when Mercury enters its shadow phase. Now, the term shadow is all about focusing on the area of the sky that Mercury will go over once, retrograde, go back over, and then station direct and move forward over again. Now, that shadow period is right where Mercury will station direct after it retrogrades. And so when Mercury it transits through that shadow period before it stations retrograde, this is the area where you're going to start to see things come up that will eventually be dealt with during the Mercury retrograde. And this is why I bring it up in these Mercury retrograde videos. It is an important part. But on October 11th, that's when Mercury does enter its shadow. So this is where you could start to see the themes of this Mercury retrograde and the errors and more of the mishaps and the problems that you can have during a Mercury retrograde start to appear more and more. Then, of course, on Halloween night, Mercury stations retrograde at 27 degrees Scorpio. It's going to be going retrograde at 5 p.m. So right before you go out and party or you go and trick or treat, you are going to have a very interesting night. And I think that it's not necessarily bad or good. Mercury retrogrades are more of kind of an annoyance type thing, and you know, you might find the repercussions of that bad, or you might find the repercussions of that favorable. However, as Mercury does station retrograde, it is going to be conjoining the planet Venus. Now, what's important about this is while Mercury is the messenger, the communicator, while it's conjoining a planet, this is where it's speaking that planet's message out a little bit more. It's turning up the volume a little bit higher. And that planet that it's vocalizing and amplifying is going to be Venus in Scorpio. Now, Venus is the planet of love, value, romance, connection, bringing things together, and indulgence. However, she's in her sign of detriment in Scorpio, meaning she doesn't operate as well. She can't do the Venusian things that she would normally like to do. She has to do Mars things because this is Mars's house. And with Venus and Scorpio, you get this theme and this characteristic of like hidden agenda, hidden values, hidden pleasures. Venus and Scorpio can also be very straightforward about what it does want. Venus and Scorpio can definitely have signs of possessiveness or wanting to hold on to something. Venus and Scorpio also likes to enjoy the things that are harder to find and the more, and the more obscure, weird things that it can get its hands on. Venus and Scorpio, is in the sense of art, is kind of like a weird art fixture that kind of gives off creepy vibes, but is kind of cool because it's an antique. So when Mercury goes retrograde while it's conjoining Venus, I think that this is going to bring out not only those Mercury retrograde themes of miscommunications, revisiting, our thoughts, thinking about things we didn't think about before, but with Venus being in Scorpio, I think this is going to bring up hidden values and hidden wants that we didn't know that we wanted or that we know that we needed. And I think while Mercury retrogrades, this is us kind of pondering that question of, oh, what do I really want? What do I really value? And what am I really holding on to? What's worth holding on to? And I think that speaks a lot about that Venus and Scorpio aspect of this retrograde. Now, the next big thing that's happening is Mercury will be then conjoining the Sun in an inferior conjunction, also known as Cazimi, on 11/11, which you can make that magical all you want, but I think it's kind of cool, but it's not too big of a deal. It just so happens to line up that day. But anyway, as Mercury conjoins the Sun and goes Cazimi, this is the part of the Mercury retrograde where things start to clear up a little bit more. So when Mercury conjoins the Sun, it's called Cazimi, and this is all about a planet getting purified by fire, getting, kind of sitting on a king's lap, for the whole world to see. And the idea of it is that this planet kind of gets purified by fire and answers start to become a little bit more clear and a lot more direct. And as Mercury conjoins the Sun in Scorpio, I think that this is when a lot of those truths will become revealed and a lot more answers will start to become clear, and exactly where you need to go and where you need to direct yourself becomes also clear as well. Now, what's also astronomically very rare about this Mercury retrograde and this Mercury Cazimi is Mercury is actually going to transit the Sun. That means Mercury is actually going to go over the Sun from our view, which is pretty cool. And if you have the right telescope to see it, go check it out. But also what I find interesting about this Mercury Cazimi is the very next morning, there will be the full moon in Taurus. And full moons are very notorious for bringing awareness to things, bringing light to things. And so while Mercury conjoins the Sun and answers become a lot more clear, truths become a lot more revealed, and maybe some secrets start to become, brought into the open, this full moon in Taurus is also going to raise a lot more awareness and bring a lot more light into the picture, which I do think is going to be beneficial, because you have to remember, this is a Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. This is stuff happening in the dark and in the background that you may not see, so maybe you do want some of this stuff to come up. But then the next day, on November 13th, that is when Mercury is going to simultaneously sextile Saturn and trine Neptune. Now, while Mercury is sextiling Saturn, this is giving us some constructive help when it comes to getting a better foundation, kind of aligning ourselves with our goals, and getting a little bit more fortified with our commitments and our responsibilities. However, as Mercury trines Neptune, this is where things start to open up into a lot more dreamy, a lot more, out there kind of perspective. Neptune is about illusion, about fantasy, about dreams, but it's also about deception. So Neptune can kind of give you some rose-colored glasses to view the world on, which can be beneficial when it comes to being creative and artistic and wanting to see things through a more, open way. But also as Mercury trines Neptune, this is where things can become a little bit confusing and a little bit blurry, because as Mercury's retrograde in Scorpio, it's very focused on one aspect and one point. That trine to Neptune can leave you making interpretations and making up scenarios that don't exist. However, as Mercury does trine Neptune, this is also going to be a kind of a good time to really look at, all right, is this the truth that I'm really looking at, or is this a false narrative that I'm believing? And I think that's going to be a really important theme as Mercury retrogrades. But then on November 20th, that is when Mercury stations direct finally at 11 degrees of Scorpio. Now, when Mercury stations direct, this is when what we received during this Mercury retrograde, what was brought to us, what needed to get, handled again and readdressed. As Mercury goes direct, this is when you can start to do those things and have a lot more of a better opportunity to handle it and address it the way that you wanted to. Doing things during a Mercury retrograde, you got to do what you got to do. However, it will kind of have some frustrations. You will have some blockages. But as Mercury stations direct and it starts to go over its shadow period again, this is when you get to go over everything. This is when you get to, put that direct motion and start to move forward with the things that, Mercury retrograde made you keep coming back to, and finally get to end all of it. And then Mercury leaves shadow on December 7th and gets out of Scorpio, because it'll be at 27 degrees Scorpio when it leaves shadow, and then like the next day or the day after that, it moves into Sagittarius. And of course, by that time, Jupiter will be in Capricorn, which is quite a bit to kind of think about, because we're going into a really big next year, but that's another video. So I guess my final thoughts on this Mercury retrograde is we got to remember, Scorpio is about like the dark. It is about the hidden. Like I was just tweeting about this earlier about how, Scorpio does rule the genitals, but the genitals are a very protective part of us where, try to, keep those private. We try to hide those and keep those away from the eye. And I think that just speaks a lot to Scorpio's characteristics. But this is a Mercury retrograde. What needs to get brought up and reviewed? What needs to get reflected on? What needs to be brought from the ground and brought into the daylight to see again? It's kind of like a time capsule almost. But what I really think is going to be important is during this time, allowing those scary things to come up. There's no need to push, something down into the ground if it's trying to make its way up. And as Mercury retrogrades through the sign of Scorpio, there's going to be a lot of things that come up for you. And if it's like, for me, it's in my 12th house. And the 12th house is all about hidden parts of yourself, the subconscious parts of yourself. And so as Mercury retrogrades through my 12th house, there's going to be a lot of things that come up for me that I might not have expected. But I know what is going to help me is going to actually be reviewing these things, and as they come up, address them, crossing that bridge when you get there. But the big thing is not to hide anything. Let it be exposed. Let it be vulnerable. That's the kind of the beauty with Scorpio. But the other part about Scorpio, that Mars side of Scorpio, that's all very vindictive, that's very direct, that's very revengeful in a sense, and that's not to put a bad name on that, but those are just qualities that you can see with Scorpio and that Scorpio is kind of all about. With this being in Scorpio, don't be afraid to defend yourself. Don't be afraid to pierce this veil. Don't be afraid to, see things the way that they are, because the one thing about Scorpio is, like, there's no hiding from Scorpio. There's only, being exposed, and Scorpio is all about locking in that target. I make this analogy a lot, but like Aries is kind of like the Marine soldier when we're talking about like Mars energy. And Scorpio is kind of like the sniper that can like sit in a tree for like 36 hours in one spot and just wait for the perfect shot at the perfect time and then pull the trigger at the perfect moment. That's Scorpio. That's sitting there going, I know it's going to happen. I see it coming up, even though there's nothing else here that says it will. And then right when it's there, you already locked on, you already have the shot, and you just pulled the trigger. And so during this Mercury retrograde, I want you guys to remember that like things are going to come up. Let them be exposed. You're going to have miscommunications. You work on communicating, because with Mercury being in Scorpio, it's going to be easy to just talk right back to people. It's going to be easy to just snap. It's going to be easy to just kind of like say whatever you want. And, we should treat people kindly. We shouldn't have to, apologize all the time for what we say. So during this time, focus on what you're talking about. Focus on what the meaning and why you're saying things, or why you are saying what you are saying. But you guys will survive this Mercury spooky grade. Scary things are going to come up, but you will live. We're going to get through this. Everything's going to be fine. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave me a like. Leave me a comment of what you think. Leave me a comment of what house this is going to be retrograding in for you, and what you think that you're going to be expecting in your own life for me in the comments below. And with that being said, thank you guys again so much for being here, and I will be seeing you next time Mercury goes retrograde.